Announcements? Announcements? David? Any announcements?
Yeah, come to my house tomorrow.
That's it. Any other announcements? Okay. How about we do some work? Okay.
Some more adjustment here.
Okay, replay. We're continuing the idea of philosophical midwifery. We explored this last week. Hey, he's got his dog. Hiya, 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 hiya. Ah, yeah, 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 you good-looking mutt. Yeah. Don't call me a mutt. Okay. I want to talk about the progression. In this game we're in terms of the metaphysics, there is a very curious process that takes place between these. Different kinds of words are used to describe them. Overflowing, right? The one. What is the connection between this? How does it go from one to the other? How does it go from being to soul? Now, these are the transitions that are important to understand in the game of philosophy. But there's something peculiar about it. As it moves successively through this, whatever is being passed on, there is a diminution, there's a diminishing. Whatever is going on as it successively goes through loses its power, It's energy power, intellectual side. Right? There's a loss. There's a loss here. Incredible. This is the problem, how to understand this, because whatever, use the term overflowing. Whatever is overflowing and creates this in turn overflows and creates that, soul. Now, when does this process end, right? It ends with man. Because there is another creation. Each of these are stages of creation. More numerous, but they always bear a similarity, a dynamic that's the same. Man is the only creator in our whole kingdom. We create a pathologos. That's what we do. We are the creators of the pathologos. If you want to understand any of these, you can look at the similarities going backwards, because this whole game is find out how to return. Hey, pretty difficult to get here. This is pretty difficult to get here. But if under similar circumstances, similar effects follow, then we can take a look at this and see how it comes into existence and how to get out of it to free the soul of the pathologos. In doing it, you'll catch on to what's necessary to see in each successive level. Same, higher, that's all. So when we did this last week, we left out one important thing. Because there's one thing that runs through all of this to account for this. What accounts for the progression? And there's only one word that we're going to have to look at. Love. Without that, it's a mechanical universe. Therefore, pathologos has to be the primary example, most vivid for a child of the experience of love. How does it get in there? The child if this is a moment of time, if this is the moment of the introduction of the pathologos, that has to be the time when the kid wakes up to what indeed will be from this point on his image of love. Whatever is stamped in here has two qualities: love and knowledge. The moment of the passage of the pathologos, the child is convinced now they know what love is. Now they know what knowledge is. If those two things aren't there, it's not going to have any effect. Therefore, these people who get these great qualities all in one now have an ideal. Whatever went on in the pathologos, transition to the pathologos, that will be the most important thing to relive. That's what will attract them. Equally, when they start looking for people to love, they will be drawn, whether they like it or not, to people who were functioning in the same way as their parents, because of the vividness of this experience. There was a TV show about, I'm not good at time, somewhere around 10 to 15 years ago. And by chance, I hooked up on it on KQED, I believe it was. And a psychiatrist was interviewing a serial killer. And this gentleman was just freely telling exactly what he did, just as if he was describing a bus schedule. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. What he did is that he would strap his subjects in a chair and then show them a screwdriver that he had polished and sharpened, and tell them that he was going to plunge this into their eye and scramble their brains. And he would tell them, if you don't look at me while I'm doing this, I'll do it in the other eye as well. He had all the descriptions you need to be able to see it vividly. The psychiatrist drew out the whole story. Never once asked, is there possibly a cause for this? Well, in this program, there was an additional an additional conversation going on, probable causes. And there were 4 people there. One of them said, look here, he said, I think I know what's going on. He said, wouldn't it be interesting to discover if his parents never, ever looked at him, ignored him his entire life? No matter what he did, it didn't make any difference. Except for one time. Or a few times. And this fourth person said, wouldn't it be likely if the parent in punishing the child said, if you don't look at me when I'm punishing you, it'll be more terrible than you can ever imagine. What do you think of that?
Yeah, sounds,
Is that possible?
yeah.
What does that mean? It means he took a pathologos saying, right, this person suggested this, by the way, that if they could examine that moment when the parent in fact did it and said it to the child, and that's the only time in the child's entire life, then that would indelibly stamp in a pattern. Why would it communicate love?
Touching him,
The child finally, go ahead.
well, touching.
What?
Touching, physically touching them is significant.
Yeah.
He was seen. He was seen.
Attention.
Not attention, being
That
seen. He was
physically touching is a good start. Add to it.
He was recognized.
It's the only time they showed themselves?
I'll take it. More, come on.
She's looking at him with the full force of her.
Pardon me?
She's looking at him with the full force of her being and
He's looking at him,
totally
right?
looking at him.
Well, his entire attention is on the child. The first time, only time, he now exists.
So that's beautiful. It looks gorgeous. It looks beautiful. Powerful.
He now exists. He now, the person who he loves, even though he's been treated indifferently totally his whole life, now sees him. He now exists.
So if all that is true in this story that you're telling us, how would the child reverse that?
How would the child reverse it?
that.
Sure.
And undo that.
Yes, absolutely.
How?
That's right. You got it. You want to know, how did this stamp in as a learning?
How do you undo it?
See, the nice thing about this is you don't have to learn how to do it, but we can explain how it's done. So now he's older, has a need for love. What's love?
That one grand moment. That one grand moment.
It'll be first a fantasy. It'll first be a fantasy, see? A daydream, a fantasy. He may start on animals, often, and then graduate to humans. He is irresistibly drawn to this game. He can now play in charge, power. He can give and take away life. This is a high, high state of mind.
But, so the idea is that love and punishment are now synonymous.
They're together. Love and punishment are together. Yeah.
So then, in this example, by becoming like his parent, he also becomes the object of the love that he had for his parent.
But he never experienced it as love.
His version of it.
Yeah,
He never experienced it as what?
love. It wasn't like, he didn't experience as a feeling of love. This turned into an obsession. It was driven by, we can, upon analysis, say, oh, we can bring him back to see that. But he doesn't think of it as even the cause of what he's doing in life. Because this psychiatrist it was an hour show. Never once did he explore family history. And that group of 4, that was real interesting. I made it up.
No such.
But the story is real. It was a TV show, and it did have this feature in it.
So the guy is, just for the heck of it, is he being motivated by love? Because somebody suggested that love is now punishment. I don't think he's, is it an act of pure love, or is it conceived of it as both? Just kind of push where the guy's coming from. Does he now get to punish and get some sort of revenge, or is he only acting as if this were the natural way to perform?
Good. Look, let me take that. Look, why does putting it into words is a freeing? Why is putting it into words a freeing?
Why does putting into words what?
Right?
Freeing?
Freeing. Yeah, why is it a freeing? And freeing from the pathologos. What's so damn important about putting it into words?
Perception.
Because in every pathologos, there is a prohibition against putting it into words.
Why?
You become conscious of it then.
Because it makes intelligible what was not intelligible.
More.
Well, before you can put it into words, you have to reflect on it.
Mm-hmm.
One. Once you put it into words, what was unformed, you were not, she said, unconscious of. Now you're suddenly aware of it, and you understand it.
Let me ask you a question, all of it. Oh, we lost, okay. Isabel went through a talk. Do you think it was important for her to put it into words, her dream? What would you suspect?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why?
It puts meaning into the naming of whatever it was. It puts meaning. It becomes meaningful to the mind. What was happening?
What's so hot about that?
Gives exist.
It makes
Yeah.
it exist.
It makes clear what really happened.
What?
It points out what really happened.
Oh, put it into words, then you recover what really happened, because new things come in. When you recover, it's more accurate. That's true. So what?
Because then you can compare your conclusion with what really happened.
Look, what we are asking about is this. Why does putting it into words
a pathologos experience, transmission scene, why is it important to put it into words? Hey, if there's an enlightenment experience or any profound experience a person has, why is it important to put it into words?
Or she didn't see it.
So that you can understand it.
They,
So that you can understand it.
look here, I'll go for that, see? We're talking about if anyone has a peak experience here, it's absolutely essential to talk about it. Isabel just did. So what? What did it do for her?
Well, she didn't see it. First of all, she didn't see it, but then when you talked about it, she realized that what she thought she experienced in the dream was an interpretation. And she really appreciated the beauty that you brought out with your questions.
You called it recovering it with more accuracy. You took the same notion and added to it, right, on a very nice level. That's right. She was able then to take away the interpretive level. Did it mean she could appreciate it more deeply?
Yeah, she appreciated it to its fullest.
Yeah. Ah.
At that point, she owned it.
Let-
It was like
let's go.
then she can own it by putting it into words and reflecting on it.
Pardon me? Do it again?
She can own it. It's hers. Before she couldn't.
Well, then you mean it's hers in a different way.
Well, it's not
What
that she
in a
didn't
different
have
way?
it.
Go ahead.
It's not that she didn't have it, and then she interpreted it. She took it away, actually, by her interpretation. But recovering it and seeing the depth and beauty of it, now she sees it as her own. And interestingly, I think that was also something that she mentioned in the beginning. She felt disconnected, but in reality, she was very connected. And
We're trying to put together a curious thing, aren't we? By studying a pathologos, whatever it takes to get through it, out of it, is the same process of working with a peak experience and getting it on a higher level and more profound level. Hey. Is that through it all?
I'm happy that you give so much power to love, because that brings the family together and carries on a tradition. But it seems like at the moment of transmission, that the knowledge also is pure and natural and easy to define and shape. So not only do you get a view of love, you also get a standard for knowledge. Now that's not the problem.
That's right.
The problem is
That's
that
right.
knowledge
That's
is
right.
self-evident.
Without a doubt.
And if you put it into words, you're no longer, it's like you're describing
Yeah.
the mask you're wearing,
Yeah.
rather than, it just seems
Like-
to me like knowledge should follow love. They
like-
should both be natural, and when you see it, it's obvious.
What if it turned out, however, that that person who understood it in that way, the beauty of the role of knowledge, has a problem with girlfriends?
With what?
Has a problem with girlfriends. They're all alike.
Yeah.
Could that possibly be? What might that suggest?
Pattern.
There's some erotic role, love role behind this that shapes the individual's attraction to things they regard as beautiful. All the knowledge is there. Everything is what you said is there. Now, the key would be What difference, all right, here's the question. Let us assume we could work with someone who went through their pathologos problem. Only one thing is missing: the role of love. Another person, exactly the same, with the role and seeing the role. What difference would it make with and without it? Suppose someone is totally angry at everything, belligerent about everything, and we're to discover that at home, that's intimately connected with love.
Or knowledge.
It would come as a great shock. They never saw it. But if behind it is the one issue, love. Don't show love. Block the appearance of love. That would have an effect. Now, if someone then took this apart and said, oh my God, that's really what's going on behind all the violence, is that my tradition, my training has been never show fairness and love. Might that have a power?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, what? You said yeah?
No,
Oh, pardon me.
Might that have a power? Yes.
Why?
Well, because there's a relationship, powerful relationship, if love is involved. And so now you have a relationship with those significant people that you respect or your authorities. You don't get that with knowledge. So there's a bond there.
Suppose every time there's a situation where the person who has this problem, it's an occasion where you have to show some kind of sympathy, some kind of concern, bordering on positive feeling, but that's denied.
No love. Then you can't show that.
And you can't show that.
Right.
It would be difficult to get someone to see that the issue behind this is a prohibition against love.
Well, it's kind of
Or that it's love to not do that.
Yes.
it's a double bind,
Yeah.
because if the child shows the compassion, then they're going against the rule of the family
Right.
and not showing the love to the parents or to the mother.
Yeah.
So to stay loyal
David,
to the love of
hold
the
it.
mother, they have to go along with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, are you painting the same picture that the idea or the knowledge can overpower any
Yes.
sort of natural self-expression?
Yes.
And so the knowledge does play a meaningful role.
Whew, amazing. Yeah.
And so at that moment of transmission,
And-
you either go with the
And it's always a phony image of knowledge,
That's probably true also.
just as it's a phony image of love.
So then, what I think you're saying is that for every pathologos, a false model of love accompanies it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So a false model of knowledge, false model of
Necessary.
love.
That's right.
False
See,
model of justice.
look here.
Yeah.
Let's say we're talking about someone here, and they had one of these great experiences. From what we're saying, finish it.
Couldn't appreciate it.
By putting it into words and describing it, you would see the reality of it.
Barbara?
No, not yet.
No.
Well, it can go two ways. they can interpret it like, which was done tonight, or
Louder, do it louder.
I said you could, if they have the experience, if they have any semblance of pathologos, they'll interpret it through that pathologos.
Until they won't remember it.
Well, that would be part of it.
Look,
The interpretation would then create an amnesia of what really what it was.
can every experience on this level be a bridge to a more profound experience through understanding, putting into words, the experience itself?
Yes.
Hey, if so, you know what it looks like? Putting it into words, understanding, is the doorway both ways. Understanding how it proceeds, how it returns.
Can't we also say, if you take Kathleen's dream,
Yeah, do it again.
where Kathleen's dream, and it seemed like there was an experience of herself in the dream as very powerful and
Yes.
effective and capable.
Yes.
But it was very difficult for her, is that right, Kathleen, to actually say that about yourself, is that right?
True.
So, did you see
Yes.
what it was like, what the effect of putting that in words about yourself
Yes.
was? What would you say that was?
That you can file it in your brain in the right file.
What will that do to have it in that file?
It will help you organize your mind, I guess.
What's the title on the file?
Oh, there we go.
Could be in the wrong file too, or to give it more importance. Or
Will you deal with the block differently now that is there a possibility of functioning differently now that you've seen yourself in the dream?
and be able to sort things with words.
What if we decided to take the occasion to look at the dream again and only get Kathleen to talk about what it was like to be victorious over that young man? What words would you have to use? And would there be any difficulty in using those words?
Just recognize that what
They don't
really
hear you.
happened. Yes.
She said to recognize it really happened,
Yeah.
but
Instead of playing it down.
It would take some work.
would it take some work, Kathleen, to talk about what that was like in that be
It would
victorious?
take some work and we need some help.
Help?
It will always be easy in this game to talk about the dumps.
Yes, it will.
It will always be difficult to talk about,
The successes, the highs. the
that's right,
victories.
because that's going returning. Now that's
That's cool.
the real trip of midwifery. So if you get into midwifery, you're getting into the dynamics of the whole thing. But the key thing is, what words awaken each person? Because there are only a few words that are going to do it. And you gotta see if you can reach them. Right?
What do you mean?
Yeah, what
Do you mean words that are specific to the drama and the clan?
Or how it is being understood or interpreted.
Oh,
See, it's always misunderstood. Whatever keywords is the lock, you want the key. And that'll be just a few words.
So like if it's, my mom was a manipulator, the word manipulating.
But then it has to then link everything together. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
well, also, what you carried away from that scene is the misunderstanding, right?
Yes.
And in order that, is it correct to say that the few words you're talking about are where you put the roles and the functions in the correct language and understand the rectification,
That's right.
what you call
That's right.
that Chinese term rectification
Yeah.
of names,
Yeah.
getting the right names.
That's why we call it rectification of names. That's right. Everything depends upon that. Rectification of names, putting proper names on it. Putting proper names on the people we love called parents, because they are not parents when they're doing this. They're not functioning as parents. They're functioning as teachers that are bringing along a belief structure. They've given up their role of being parents. No, I don't think any parent anywhere would ever do what they've done when they transmit a pathologos scene if they knew what they were doing. They would do it. What's done unto them, they do unto others.
I was thinking when you said putting it into words, it has a sense of release as well as making the situation in your head real.
Yeah, what did he say? I didn't hear him.
Could you repeat it?
Oh, good, thank you.
There was a sense of release, and putting into words makes it real.
That's right. That's right. Now you bring back a reality it didn't have before.
In that dynamic of returning, going back up, isn't that another way of referring to justice?
Is there no way of avoiding?
Isn't that another way of referring to justice in the diagram of going back up to the
That's
higher?
right. That's right. That's what it does.
It's justice.
Yeah. You're bringing understanding with you. That's the power. Now, I don't think I answered your point. So you might have to say it again.
The process of returning,
Yes.
isn't that justice as well?
Isn't that?
Justice.
Oh, see? That's absolutely right. Yeah. This is going to end up with two words, right? Justice, providence. Yeah.
So are you still asking the question, what would be the words that would invite somebody to embrace this process of midwifery and see it as a viable solution? Justice, truth, understanding, knowledge, soul, mind, spirit. All of those things are sort of implied.
That's right.
For somebody who wants to play this game.
That's right.
But it would take a real snake charmer to put that into a game and do the process and then pull it out and then put a little cap on it by saying, oh, that's justice.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some terms
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
get people to embrace
sure.
midwifery.
Certainly right.
I noticed that those important words.
The what work?
The important words. I noticed that before a talk, those words weren't really part of my vocabulary. Those things that I never put into words. And then once I do put it into words, I really like those words afterwards.
Good.
I use them all the time.
Good.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, thank you.
Like sneaky manipulator. Like when somebody was functioning in my family. Then when I finally said that's how they were functioning, it put it into words, and then later it was like, oh, this is a new piece of language that I can use now.
Yeah. Functional words.
Yeah.
But I thought you were talking about what it did to you to see that. I thought the words you were talking about were courage, wisdom, justice, seeing those in yourself afterwards.
No,
I thought that's
that's
what
not
you
what
were
he was talking about.
That was another guy.
So, if the problem in all the transmission scenes is,
No, do it again.
if the problem in, since the problem in all transmission scenes is to take an image of love as real,
That's right.
what is
Why?
what is real love?
What is it?
What? Yeah. Like,
Cleaned up.
yeah, but what would it be?
Only the power that runs through the universe.
Only the power that runs through the universe.
Apart from that, nothing.
So,
Did you say runs the universe or runs through the universe?
Well, look here. Why is it that when you experience something you think is really beautiful, that you're close to what's real?
What's real? Close to what's
Real.
Because whatever I think is beautiful is my ideal. Is my ideal.
Why do you think it's your ideal? But go ahead.
Well, if we're talking about Pathologo's image.
Okay, no. Go back to my point. Is there some sense that if you're dealing with something that is most beautiful, that you're touching on something that's likely to be real rather than mere appearance?
Yes.
Does it also communicate the sense that you're likely close to something that is true rather than false?
Yes.
Oh. And in some way, in how it was put together, there's a sense of balance.
Yep.
And a sense of fairness,
Yep.
which is justice.
Yep. Yep.
Why are those words connected?
They seem to be.
And do they come in the experience of love? No. Yeah.
They seem to be pointing towards the same thing. And yes.
Yes, okay. Sure, 1, 2.
Also goodness. Also goodness
Oh, and how?
in the experience of beauty.
Oh, yes. Goodness is essential. Since this is the good, therefore this must be goodness. Goodness is going to go through the whole thing. Lesser, shadows. Right.
So this, what you just said makes this more confusing to me. So I think a child would be able to experience that kind of love, what you just went through with Eldar. To be awakened by that kind of beauty. And so,
Until there's a counterattack against it and it's demolished.
yeah, so at some point, at the transmission, they accepted a lower image, an image of love.
It's a lower image. That's right.
So then it doesn't seem right to say that love was functioning there. It's like it's a lack of love for.
It's a new kind of love because the child now understands how love is functioning in the family. Before that, they just knew mother or father. Now they have a different idea of love. And it's weaker.
Yeah, but if they can experience that high love, why in the world?
Look, you're absolutely right. You see, to make sense of midwifery, it all depends upon this one idea. Before this, there was a much greater degree of freedom. The puzzle with the pathologos is why did something that is in principle and after analyzed inferior accepted as real?
Why give up?
This is childhood amnesia that psychologists like to talk about. They don't talk about it in this way. This experience has such intensity that the child, their memory, this can't be significant anymore. Therefore, it loses its credibility, its memorability. The big question is, why do we accept something so weak in comparison to what we had before? There's something new, the way they appeared. We're seeing a new reality, a higher reality.
You know, I showed a film today to my students. They do this experiment where they have babies with the mother, and they tell the mother, okay, do not show any facial expression now when your baby coos or says something to you. So we're talking about babies that are like 6, 7 months old. And you know, you can see they're interacting. The baby says something and the mother smiles and says something back. But as soon as the mother takes on the deadpan expression, the baby immediately sees that and freaks out. They right away start crying and biting their nails and hiccuping, and so it's like if we don't get the natural response from our parents, or you know, like, then the love, that's the love, just the natural.
That's what was missing in the study. Yeah.
Dialectic of the universe.
So then, that state of freedom before the transmission scene, however glorious it is, lacks love.
Yes, you see.
And that's.
Yes, go ahead.
So, I mean, that would be like an enlightenment state prior to the transmission, which we would, in this group, be striving for. But for the child.
Okay, excuse me. Something is crowding your voice out, so I have to give voice to it. The magic of midwifery is when this loses its power, the person can go back to where they were before. Where they were before was far more free, open, generous, human. And that's what's so important.
And the reason they left.
They can then pick up where they were before and move in a more meaningful way from that platform.
And is the point of your talk tonight that the reason that a child would leave that glorious state is the one missing thing, love? Does that state lack?
That's right.
Is that a state where love is not present because you're so free?
Answer it.
Well, for us, no, because, well, upon reflection, we see that providence is functioning there.
That's
so
right.
We have love. But for a child who doesn't have that philosophical background.
That's right. And to be able to see it doesn't have that is freeing.
Doesn't have love?
Or providence.
It does. Oh, it prior to problems.
No.
Oh.
So, for a pathologos transmission to be successful, the child has to make a choice. They accept an inferior model or form of love, as you said before. But isn't the reason why they accept it because the alternative is to reject their parents or their guardians in some way?
No choice. I wish it were a choice and never a choice.
No choice?
You know, years ago, my son Peter was about 3 years old. That's a couple of years ago. And we were in San Francisco. I had a great relation with my kids. And I'm watching him on a tricycle going back and forth along the corridors. I can't figure out what the hell am I watching for. I'm absorbed. I figure, what the hell? What do I care? What's? But there I was, see? And we had forced air heating in San Francisco. Comes up from the floor through grates. And he was on the tricycle, and he went over the grate. And I blew up. I thought, what the fuck am I blowing up for? I blew up. For what? Well, that bugged me for a long while until I figured, there's something going on, Pierre. You don't understand. Here's a kid you love. You blew up on him for just going over a grate. It wasn't until I realized that he was having so much fun in the house on his tricycle that I objected to that freedom. And I just made the phony excuse that he was riding on that iron grating with a forced air bullshit. It took me a long time to discover that. I was going, what did I do that for? Like, it was programmed. I'm waiting. I don't know what I was waiting for. I would say that's when midwifery began for me. I say, you know, you think you're so smart? Well, you jerk. You better start figuring out what's going on, because what's going on ain't what you think.
Did you go back? Did you ask him if he remembered that scene? Did you ask him if he remembered that scene?
No.
So it's kind of like the mountain and Mohammed thing.
Pardon me?
The mountain and the Mohammed thing.
Yeah.
It seems like you don't bring anything and that state continues. But once the mountain comes to you and you pose a bunch of stuff on that state, you've got a problem. But if you don't, then what you've done is you've just kind of liberated the mind to be, so it's what you bring to the mind.
That's right.
So if you wanted to have a beautiful relationship, you'd first have to figure out what a beautiful relationship was, free from opinions and ideas and things like that, or whatever you're doing.
Do you think that objecting to that fun that he was having, that was something that you had gotten from your own family dynamic?
Oh yeah, I had to trace it, but that took several years.
Yeah, so you were able you were able to look back and see where that came from.
I was thinking that in the relationship with the child, before the transmission scene, you're going to respond to him from your own pathologos, right? And what I'm thinking is, I was trying to think of a way of capturing what you've talked about before as the shaping scenes, because that sets up a question in the child. What's going on? Right? What's going on? So then this comes as the answer. So it's the moment of love, but isn't it also when you come to the understanding, that's an answer to a puzzle, a mystery you've been working on,
It's a puzzle, it's a
right?
mystery.
And you haven't
That's right.
you haven't understood
That's right.
what was the object of all these other little machinations,
Yeah.
these little deals with your parents and with your
Yeah.
right?
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. It'll be a work, it'll be a study.
Oh, did you announce